Those of you who know me know that I don't know a lot about cars and mechanical kinds of things. But I know enough to know this, that if you disconnected the gas tank from the rest of the car and just set it out on the ground, you wouldn't expect to go very far. Why is it that we as Christians tend to do that with our Christian walk? I'll explain a little bit more in today's Connections. Okay, so using the illustration of a car and a gas tank and disconnecting that gas tank from the car and still expecting to be able to go places, still expecting that engine to crank up and run for very long at all, is rather silly. But it's the same way in the Christian life when it comes to prayer. Prayer is that fuel connection. Prayer is that power connection that moves us forward in our Christian life. And the reason for that is because prayer is the very center of our expression of faith. Faith is more than just a word that we use to say, I have faith. We have to express that, and then we have to walk out in it. I know for me in my life, I've had all kinds of prayers. I've had prayers that I call ceiling prayers. You know, those prayers that you pray and you pray them earnestly, but you feel like they're not going any further than the ceiling. I've also prayed what I would call jam prayers. You know those. Those are the kind of prayers that when you're in a jam, you cry out to God and you say, help me, God. And then when you're through the jam, you forget all about praying again. And of course, there's probably the least effective kind of praying. I call that the my way praying. In other words, I may be praying good things, I may be praying for good things, but I'm praying with the wrong motive. I've got my idea of how God should answer that prayer, and I'm looking for my way to be accomplished in my praying. I'm looking for my outcome in prayer. And so those kinds of prayers are not very effective. Yet in James 5 it says this, it says, the prayer of a righteous man availeth much. That means that the prayer of a righteous man gets a lot done. The prayer of a righteous man brings power. It brings provision. Yet, what does our prayer life look like so often? Our prayer life seems to be that gas tank disconnected from the car, laying on the side in hopes it will keep moving forward. Prayer seems to be the last thing even in the church. It takes a crisis like 9/11 when it came along. The churches across America were filled with people asking for prayer. When people get in trouble, when people are having difficulties or crises in their life, they ask for prayer. When we go through tough times, that's when we tend to pray. But the rest of the time we disconnect that tank and lay it off to the side. But there's that promise. Wow, the prayer of a righteous man availeth much. What is it to be righteous? Those of you who know me have heard me say to be righteous simply means this, not to be perfect, not to be somebody who is completely and totally without sin. Righteous means to be in right standing with God. And James makes that very clear how that happens. Because just before he says, the prayer of a righteous man availeth much, or the prayer of a righteous man is filled with power and provision, he says this, he says, therefore confess your sins one to another and pray for one another. Prayer is first and foremost an expression of our faith in God. And what's important for you and I to remember is that it's got to be more than just our verbal communication to God. It's got to be our dialogue, our hearing from God, but then it also has to involve not just our head, not just our mouth, not even just our heart, as much as it is our feet. We need to step out in faith, believing that God is going to hear us, that God is going to answer the prayer, and be willing to say, God, your way be done. Your will be done, not my will. But it begins with being humble. It begins with being transparent. Honestly, how transparent are you? Do you confess your sins to others? Do you pray for others? Do you put others first in your prayers, or is it all about you? You want a powerful, effective prayer life? Let it begin by just getting honest with others, by just letting yourself be transparent. I know it's a fearful kind of thing. I'm a pastor. And, and so often I wonder, what must some people think when I tell them some of the issues in my own life, and I say things like, my issues are now having issues because I've got so many issues and stuff. But it's a part of living authentically before a holy God. God already knows those things, and He calls us to share those things with others. Now, I'm not talking about getting out on a soapbox in the public square and declaring all your sins. I'm talking about having those in your life, those trusted people of faith. Not the people that you're comfortable with sharing your sins. Oh, it's easy to go tell somebody that you're doing something that they're also doing. You'll get their sympathy. But when you go to somebody who's not doing what you're doing and who's living a life of faith, and you say, you know what, I have a struggle with this in my life. I have a sin that I'm struggling with overcoming. I'm tempted all the time in this. And I fail sometimes more often than I succeed. That's a transparency. That's an authenticity of your life. And then you connect that life to praying for others. And then you connect that praying for others into taking steps of faith through your prayers. And the prayers of a righteous, in right standing with God, man or woman of God, availeth much. The power of prayer is one of the things that is at the very core, at the very center of our relationship with God. He gave it to us. He did not create us and leave us alone. He gave it to us to have communion with Him. Quit letting the gas tank lay on the side of the road and sit behind the wheel of a car wondering why you're not going anywhere. Reconnect that in prayer into your life, into your disciplines, believing in faith that God hears you, that God desires more for your life than even you desire, and trust Him with those things. God bless you. Have a great weekend.